Hi, my name is Carver Ossoff. I'm here with Chase Ivancic and Keaton Dinger. We're going to be talking about encryption and the evolution of encryption. Um, we're going to be focusing on three main points over the past 100 years. Our belief is that encryption, since it has been introduced and integrated with technology, has really blown up in three main places: the importance of it, how often it's used, and the complexity of it. What is encryption? Encryption is the side of cryptology that turns plain text information into secret code. Decryption, on the other hand, is turning that code back into usable information with a key or secret algorithm. There's evidence that encryption has existed for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians used secret hieroglyphics. As I mentioned, over the course of the last century, encryption practices have skyrocketed in complexity because of advanced math and the integration of technology. In the background of this slide, you're going to see a tale from ancient Sparta. What they used to do is they would press characters into parchment from their alphabet. The person that was supposed to receive the code would have a rod of a certain width, and when they received the code, they would wrap the parchment around the rod, and the message would line up across that they're trying to get to, they're trying to say. Early encryption machines. So encryption existed for a while, but as we said, technology and machines changed everything. In 1918, a German engineer filed a patent for the Enigma machine. Originally, Enigma was meant for private businesses and banks, even small businesses. After World War I, when they saw how complex this could be, the military took control of it. At the time, most encryptions were simple transpositions or substitutions. What made Enigma so difficult to track was that it was one of the first codes that swapped multiple alphabets repeatedly. Because of its high complexity, Germans trusted this to be invulnerable. They really believed it was uncrackable, so they used it for all of their communications, which ended up not being, good for them once we decrypted it. Here's a picture of the Enigma machine. Um, I don't know if my cursor shows up, but the way this thing worked is current would come down from the battery at the top right, go to a button. You press down a button, it would go to the right, down to the bottom, swap with a pair. This is a configuration, it's the baseline configuration. You can pair any two letters together. So we go from the current would go from one letter to the base of another letter. Back up to the top, it would swap alphabets three times. Sometimes it was four to five, but most times it was three. And these alphabet swaps, the way that they would work is every time you pressed a button, they would turn, but only some of them had teeth at certain points. So an alphabet might turn every two key presses, every five key presses, depended on the one that they were using, the wheel that they were using. Now, the crux of this is at the very top left, you see the current turnaround. That means that it's being reflected with a key pair again. And it goes back through the exact same alphabets that it just went through. This reflection and the pair is actually what allows the Enigma bit to be decrypted. Because if you send a message through that gets scrambled a bunch of times, but then gets reflected, as long as you know that reflection, then you can set up your configuration to send it through the opposite way. It'll reflect and give you back the correct character. The early decryption machines, Alan Turing and Marian Rejewski, analyzed and cracked Enigma using a machine called a Bombay. Alan Turing, a British mathematician I'm sure we've all heard of. Marian Rejewski is well known in the decryption community. She had a bunch of experience decrypting the first Enigma machine during World War One. Very smart person. The way that they decrypted this was basically brute force. They found pairs that they knew existed, and they put every single possibility of those two pairs into alphabets and just had them turn consistently until a matching alphabet was found. This was not very efficient, but it eventually did crack a code. In 1941, they cracked one, and it led to the capture of a German U-boat. On board that U-boat was an Enigma machine with cipher keys and code books. So this gave them the machine, how it was built, the keys to decrypt it, and the code books, which told them what configurations were used on what days of the month. The seizure of this allowed Allies forces to decrypt these Enigma codes within 2 minutes by 1945. So German encryptions by the end of the war were essentially useless, but they had no idea. This really shows how we talk in class about security threats and the different types. This shows how theft, which in class we mentioned things like a laptop being stolen out of a coffee shop, but theft can still be a huge security threat, even against the most complex um, encryption at the time during a time of war. Stealing this machine and stealing the code books allowed us to basically crack everything.
As we move into the 60s and 70s, computers and eventually personal computers will start to become more popular. And with this increase in computing power and computer access, the need for better encryption methods also increases. One of the first encryption methods designed specifically for a computer was the Lucifer method, developed at IBM by Horst Feistel. It's symmetric, using the same key to both encrypt and decrypt, and it works by splitting the data into blocks and mixing those blocks up, then swapping those blocks and repeating the same process. Because it goes through that process multiple times, it becomes almost impossible to crack without the key. And it really takes advantage of the computing power of computers. After a few iterations and updates, it became the model used for the Data Encryption Standard, or DES, which was used from 1977 all the way until 2005. The power of computers also gave way to better decryption methods, and the one that benefited the most was the brute force method. Brute force works by trying every possible key until one produces a readable result. So, given enough time, brute force will eventually find a solution. The best way to defend against brute force attacks is to have a longer key, which increases the brute force time exponentially. But for weaker keys, the speed computers can brute force at, it makes them much easier and quicker to crack than they did before computers were around. So many passwords today could be cracked almost instantly with an automated brute force method. But luckily, there's ways to prevent that, like how sometimes you're only given 5 or 10 attempts before being locked out of trying to log in, or multi-factor authorization.
Today I'm talking about AES, the modern standard of encryption. And that was created by Joan Damon and Vincent Richmond. And it was originally called Dale and submitted to a competition hosted by NIST to replace DES. They had won, and their algorithm was, well, they won because it was both flexible in usages. It was resistant to brute force attacks, and it could also quickly process large amounts of data to encrypt. And then afterwards, and then NIST replaced the name to AES to reflect its modern usage. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so how does AES work? Good question. So it works in several rounds and multiple steps. The first one is key expansion, which generates a round keys, which are subkeys derived from the original key. Then the second step is initial add round keys, which the input block. Sorry. The add round key XORs plain text with the key, which makes sure that the encryption depends upon the key from the very start to see where there's a clear line of reasoning between input, key, output. And then there are, depending on the length of your key, which would be 128, 192, or 256, you would have 10, 12, or 14 rounds respectively. The first part of the round is subbytes, where bytes are replaced using a substitution box or table. That's what I meant to say. And shift rows, and the rows in the state matrix are shifted around, as it implies. Mixed columns, columns are mixed around, same thing. Then add round key, which doors from with the round key and all these steps, the purpose of which are to create more diffusion and confusion between the input key and output, make it hard for an attacker to potentially decrypt the plaintext, the encrypted text into plaintext, well, I should say. And then the final round with the same steps, except mixed columns is not done because it creates unnecessary diffusion from what I understand. And then you get your output. So, like I said, applications is very flexible in how it can be used. Secure communication is one. It can be used for data transmitted across websites and also like VoIP, voice chats like Skype. Then wireless communication is also another thing. Data transmission through a VPN can the traffic gets protected from being intercepted. Data stored in file protection, hard drive, and SSD encryption. um, Financial banking systems, card transactions, ATMs, and things like that are encrypted. And for government security, the most secure and highly valued information gets protected because it's highly valued, and 256 length keys usually used. And so I just want to talk briefly at the end about the future of what encryption holds. So as data and our needs for it expands, and we will require more and more secure, reliable, and scalable encryption methods. One solution or idea that we can look to is quantum computing, which provides a theoretically possible unbreakable encryption algorithm. So we'll see where that goes because I assume if an attacker would have a quantum computer themselves, then they could also maybe crack it, but we'll see how it goes. But thank you for listening to our presentation, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.